Berthasell. All right, in council chambers, our councilors Berthasell, Laraway, Marks, Kenny, myself, Councilor Demerit is joining us online, and Councilor Robertson could not make it this evening. This is our second scheduled budget workshop, and tonight we're taking up Department Operating Capital Plan Review Public Services. Before we begin with new budget items, we had a request from Councilor Demerit at the end of our budget workshop last week to take a moment and talk about service level questions that we had. We spent a great deal of time going through budget lines and budget categories last week, recommending either, adoption, asking a lot of questions about appropriate levels of funding. We didn't talk about the high level policy decisions about whether we're offering the appropriate service level for the community. And Councilor Demerit wanted us to take a moment to pause and think about that. And I think that's worthwhile. So if anybody has any service level comments or questions, or any of the more sort of global things we should talk about, let's begin there tonight. So.
Service level questions specifically on last week.
Specifically on last week's, I think that's a good
general management section.
Yes.
Town manager
and office staff and things like that.
Thank you.
And we had things like reduced town manager professional services line. We had a couple other suggestions made, and then we just had some general comments about what were the expectations of our community about service. Are we offering the appropriate level of opportunity for community members to engage with the town? So. Councilor Demerit, is Dan on with us?
He was gonna be late.
Okay.
I got a text. He was running a little bit late.
Well, maybe we can circle back to this at the end as well then.
Sure.
If Dan's not able to join us right now, and it was his question that kind of sparked that. So let's pick up right into the budget. So we're going to start with the community development budget, code enforcement, planning, economic development, and assessing. We had a nice written review by our town staff and town manager. So any questions about the general organization of this section or the service level expectations that the town manager has laid out?
I wanted to know more about life safety standards at the very beginning. I'm new and I'm not really fully sure what life safety standards means. For the rest of you all?
Yeah, no, go.
Yeah, no, I was trying to figure out which page we were on.
Oh, just the very first page,
Yeah.
the very first line.
So, basically with code enforcement, the code that we have adopted, talks about basic life safety and how we enforce our codes and what we need to do. And that's a job of code enforcement, is to look at situations and make sure that basic life safety is being followed. And that's what the International Building Code.
Well, so,
In depth.
yeah, so when you look at codes, you've got building codes, you've got land use codes, you've got shoreland zoning code, which while it's in land use is different. Life safety, a lot of the life safety code comes out of NFPA, National Fire Protection Association. But we also use that as an overarching term when we think about life safety as opposed to aesthetics, and it is our overarching
Excuse me.
conversation, or the term we use here. We've got building code, life safety code is kind of all the other rodents.
Try to prevent disasters or pests or harm to people code.
And most of that is the NFPA code is enforced through the fire department. However, we have a collaborative relationship between the two. So for us, the life safety is all that code, non-fire stuff that kind of is around the periphery.
Okay,
And if you have a building that has more than 2 units in it, they come around every 3 years and inspect for stuff.
Which includes not just fire, but pests and what is another example?
I always think of it as fire.
Like the gas detectors, would that fall under this?
So, yeah, they're looking for gas detectors. Those inspections are usually not done with code enforcement, but rather the fire department's life safety. So they really are looking at wire, do you have exposed wiring? What's your heating situation? If they tag something in that is clearly a code violation, like you've got a place that is really ripe for pests to want to live, they would make a referral for that.
Okay.
But
Thanks.
normally those rental inspections are usually conducted by the fire department.
Thank you.
Okay, so I thought maybe we'll do how we did last week. We'll go section by section. We'll dive in, we'll do a quick overview, or rather than having a quick staff presentation, we'll direct our questions to staff and maybe we'll get a better picture of how the budget functions. So we're going to begin in the first section, community development assessor, and look at changes in this section. We see, 1 or 2 lines that show significant reduction, few lines that show moderate increases. So I think should entertain any questions. I'm looking at page 7 where the figure starts, but we get into the detail on page 8.
Yes, do we have the salary data for 2024 separate? Because I know that's always the problem, the trick and the hard part with this is portions here, portions there, you don't know. what's
Oh,
going on.
yeah,
But so I know we have you provided that handout. I thought it was the 2024 projected. Am I off on that?
Wasn't there an FTEs over time coming?
That too.
that what you're
That too.
thinking?
I'm thinking of,
FTEs over time. I spent a lot of time with Jeff on that because the research took a lot longer. I showed him the draft. It is where we want it. It's just going to take me another half hour or so to get it together.
I thought the salary
Total,
piece
that's
was-
part of, yes. The answer is yes. You wanted by title, total amount.
the same thing you've already given us that went back to 2018, but
You want,
2024.
24. oh, all right.
Has that request not even been made or not? Maybe it hasn't. I didn't realize it wasn't there until actually
So
after we
Leo,
last meeting.
whatever you need.
But has that already been made? Or?
I don't remember that particular one, but
Okay.
it could be just because I'm kind of getting flooded, so please feel free to remind me.
Good. I don't know who would do that?
Well, 'tis the season.
So in the assessing budget, that salary amount is only for the administrative assistant.
It's just a portion.
A
Yeah,
portion of the administrative assistant.
the assessor is not on salary.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions. Sorry, where is that? Maybe I found it later, but
Contract services, I think you'll
I
I
find
think
it.
it's contracted assessing down at the bottom there.
Professional services, right?
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, so line 690, 696.
On that line, I'm wondering, I guess, why we budget for 82,000, it doesn't seem like in any recent years we've come close to that.
Because this is a contract.
Okay.
That we're paying a set amount that equals 82,000 in the past. 2018, 19, where you're 20, 21, this current year is the second year we've had the assessor, contracted assessor. But in prior years, we were working on a revow, which was that contracted piece was in hopes of getting people in, and ultimately we ended up taking that project off the operating books and putting it someplace else. So that's why we didn't expend it, because we couldn't find the people to do that work.
Understood.
Just on the FTE question, can we jump back to page 2 for 1 second, where the FTE are listed for this department?
Yeah.
Or is this like a collection of departments? What is
It
this
is.
technically called? Okay.
Yeah, so I think there have been some, if you don't live it, I think it's a little confusing to you. So we use an umbrella of community services or public services that includes code, planning, economic development, Parks and Rec, and the library. They all kind of come together to provide those services to the community, assessing. When we think of community development, that is an Office of Community Development that holds divisions of code, planning, economic development, and assessing. Parks and Recreation has reported up through that department. As part of your budget in front of you, we're gonna kind of morph that department a little bit, but it will still be under that umbrella. And then the library, well, never alone, is kind of over in its own umbrella.
Just on the FTEs, can you, just check me on how many of these positions are partly funded by the Economic Development Fund? As
Sure.
individually, it tells it when we go through, but I wanted to be sure I counted them right. Which ones are the halfway funded there?
So the Economic Development Director is 100% funded. The 50% of our Director of Community Policing is funded through the
Right.
TIF. 50% of our planner is funded through the TIF. 20% of our administrative assistant is funded by the TIF. And then we have people outside of that department who have job functions that qualify for funding under the TIF. Specifically, so I'm trying to do this. We have a community web graphic designer / communications person that 60% of their job in FY24 is funded out of the TIF. We are recommending that goes to 100% with a job shift, so shifting 100% of their time.
And they're not recorded here. So where are they recorded then, that staff person?
That staff person is recorded in the TIF budget. I've got a document here I can share with you.
Okay, and so there's other personnel, not just the
Yep.
ones we have listed in our binder
So
under TIF. Okay.
when we think about TIF, we've got people who are, I'm just gonna, let me share this document.
Yeah, that sounds simpler. And quick question of the ones listed here, the assessor I know is a contractor and the code enforcement officer is
Is
funded.
salary, funded 100% on general fund taxes.
Okay, so that's 100% and everybody else is partly TIF, partly general fund. Got it. Thank you. Onward, Jeff.
All
Sorry.
right, no, that's a great question. So this is the assessor piece is a relatively small part of the budget with relatively little change, but if there are any questions, we should spend the time asking about it. Okay, and if we're prepared, we can move on to community development planning on page 9. It shows a little bit more variable.
So sorry, Jeff, on page 7, the salary reported there is not the assessor because that's the contract. So whose salary is that reported there?
That's the portion of the allocated portion of the administrative
That's you.
assistant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Got it.
And in the multiple.
In the description boxes, yeah.
And
got it.
in the multiple pages of the salary breakdown, we have bodies in one iteration and the other iteration breaks down what portion of people are paid out of which department.
Okay, thank you.
With the media person you were just talking about, I think you just said that that's gonna go 100%.
Yeah, so let's talk about economic development. When we get to economic development, can we talk about that?
Because that person's not in there.
Got it. Thank you.
It's not even confusing.
Oh, not at all.
All right,
Planning?
planning, we're on to planning, right? Community development and planning. So the line that I was glad to see, we had a 30% reduction in the travel line in this section. I think that's always nice, but I want to make sure that I want to understand why we're able to cut that 30%.
Sure, when this will be the second year of the planner being remote. And when we first did that, we didn't kind of know how that would all work and what amounts would be spent on that travel line and how much that would go. So when we were able to look at exactly what we were doing and when he was coming, how he was coming and how that was all working, we were able to cut some of that. That's all.
So this was, I remember Sophie explained, this was an experiment for 1 year. You guys think it's really worked out?
I will tell you from a staff perspective, it is working great. In fact, I think for some staff people, it's easier to get in touch with Kyle. I have checked in with some of our larger projects to make sure that there hasn't been delay. So I've actually contacted some of the developers or property people. And the University of Maine wasn't even aware that he wasn't here. So that to me says that the concern that we had about spaces is fine. I would also say that the integration on the video conferencing and stuff like that worked out better than we thought, which is what has allowed us, for example, if there's a holiday week, we ask him not to spend his time traveling for that, because it really is not, it's not diminishing his ability to do his work. So.
I was wondering on that line if, I mean, I appreciate seeing the cut. The usage was still way under what we were budgeting for this coming year in this proposed budget. I was wondering why we wouldn't even be able to cut that further.
So I'm a little bit concerned to cut it much more, simply because we are seeing an uptick in development and projects here that he's going to have to be here for. And I kind of am more of an incrementalist when it comes to rolling it back. If we can get through this next year at this level or less, then I think we should absolutely look at rolling it back more.
I had similar questions about advertising and postage and the fact that those are minimal. Are we expecting, we want to keep those in because we've got a comprehensive planning process coming at us? Is that the thinking?
Yeah, and you know, we have a council that, for example, we're doing the C2 zone change, and folks here indicated they wanted more of a mailing. That's only about 150 people, but to put a postcard out to the community, if we were doing a community one, is about $600. So oftentimes we do that through developers paying, you know, if they are instigating the change, but we need some if we are the ones that are instigating. And I kind of am anticipating that more paper is going to go out than less.
I think I saw Dan jump on.
Yeah, he's on the Zoom. It sounds like.
Welcome, Dan.
Hi, everybody. I'm probably gonna have my video off most of the time, but thank you. Sorry, not
Hi,
to be there.
Dan.
Jump in if I miss you. I'm trying to keep an eye on the screen, but feel free to interrupt, right, if I missed the hand, because I've done that in the past.
Okay,
any
thank you.
Any other questions on the planning portion?
I had a question just on page 11. It isn't really about reducing a line or anything like that, but I know we talked about legal services last time under the town management budget. And I was just curious, do we have a breakdown of how legal services is billed to all our different departments, or are these the only two it's billed to?
So legal services for general things come to me. For specific, we want to deal with ordinances and stuff like that. It goes to planning, if it's part of planning. And then police and fire have some amount. Normally, I take as much as I can and then send them the rest, but theirs are in there this coming year because we're going to start collective bargaining with both units.
Is that an easy thing for you to just send me an itemized, like us and anyone else who wants it? Like, here's the total lawyer cost by the time we
gosh.
add it up for all departments?
Well, I'll give you the total lawyer cost, and if you go back, you can see what Department 10 is or 11
Yeah.
is, what,
Yeah.
easy to do.
I was just curious
Yeah,
what it
it's a-
adds up to
it's
when
a
you put them together,
vendor
because I
report.
noticed it's split between a lot of, thank you.
I don't want to rush through if people have questions. So we can certainly take the time, but we'll move on to code enforcement. And if we have anything that relates back, we'll go back. Code enforcement begins on page 12. the annotation on page 13. I'm seeing a slight reduction. Maybe Sophie, you might explain what professional services are in the context of code enforcement.
Well, that would be one that could be one of two things. That could be legal services if we had a code violation that people were doing, that we were trying to work our way through. It can also be not necessarily training, but there are resources, consulting resources or other resources that if our code officer needs, they could get. We've used it before to help understand highly technical documents or things like that. So in this venue, professional services could also mean if there were if we needed something to be inspected that we didn't have the technical capability to do or the equipment to get to, if we could use that. I think he's used it in the past if there were some tree issues. I think he's called in an arborist to look at stuff like that. So it's the idea of it is unusual in a community of this size. Orono and Old Town are very, very fortunate to have code officers that do electrical, plumbing, building, shoreland, general code, and our 80K, which is civil court representation. That's unusual. But when we want a generalist that can handle most of the bread and butter, it means that they're not a specialist in certain things. So when he needs some specialization, sometimes because his training budget is really low, if there were resources, code books, stuff like that, we might take out of that.
And in the overview to the section in the front, says one of the scope of work is continuing with the revision and simplification of town ordinances with special attention to enforcement resolution-based strategies. I was curious if you could say a little bit more about what that means.
So enforcement resolution strategy?
Yes.
So at the end of the day, the goal is to make things safe and to resolve the problem. And I think we try not to work through, always look at it as a punitive, here's a violation, there's a cost to it, you must get it done. It is more about getting to that, safely getting to that. There are things that have to be resolved like that. And we sometimes have to use the pressures of litigation or fines to get there if people aren't going to do it. But for the most part, what we try to do is work with landowners to resolve the issues that they have. And to be fair, with a lot of old stock residential properties, these things come up, and they're not an easy fix. It's not a weekend moment, or I can just get somebody here and now getting contractors to move. So really it's more of a working with property owners than it is necessarily just here's the violation, get it done. And if it's not done by this day.
Well, and we've gotten a lot of feedback that the way our code is written, if you've done something wrong, the first thing I need to do or Pat needs to do to protect the town is to give you a notice of violation, which is just not the way you make friends and influence people to voluntarily resolve issues. So I think we really need to think about, for example, is notification of the property owner that there is a violation an adequate time that we could, if the ordinance said that, then you could just go back to that time with the clock if they didn't behave, if they didn't come into compliance. But yeah, so the way the ordinance is written, in order to comply with it from an enforcement standpoint, it's really heavy-handed.
All right, thank you. I know that's not exactly a budget question. It's helpful to know what that means.
All about scope of work.
Any questions on personnel? Is probably the biggest chunk of this section. So questions on that or Move on.
15?
We'll move on to page 15, which is the first TIF section. This is the downtown TIF.
Can I make a suggestion that council might want to look at the overall economic development budget that starts on page 22? In the past, council didn't see the TIF stuff until the very end to see how it broke down, but it's hard to look individually at each one of those buckets when what we really are talking about is how this all fits
Yeah,
together.
no, that's a great
Can I
suggestion.
ask a quick question about the individual buckets?
Sure.
How does a group decide to become a TIF group? Or does the town tell them they're a TIF group? Or do they come to you and say, we want to be a TIF group? Or like, what happens? How does that happen?
I do have a little bit more experience. I'm a
Okay.
little green on this.
So tax increment financing districts are areas in which a boundary is drawn around one or multiple parcels of property. Within that boundary, after it is drawn, any growth, real estate growth in value in that district is sheltered from taxation from other entities. So sheltered value, the value is not considered part of our taxable value. So we don't pay county tax on it. We don't pay school mill contribution on it. We collect taxes from it. But because it's sheltered, the only thing we can use those tax dollars that we have collected on it are for economic development purposes. And it's just not about me sitting at my desk saying, oh yeah, that's an economic development purpose. When we put the TIF together, which a TIF has to have an economic development purpose, and they are limited. You can apply for several different types of TIFs, and we have 3 here types. We have general economic development, we have a downtown and transit-oriented TIF district, and we have an affordable TIF district down at the Webster. So they have to fit a statutory definition of an allowed use. Then from that, the town council sits and talks talks about what's important to it, where it thinks we need to spend money, and makes a list of all the things they think should be in the TIF district. Goes to public hearing. You could get input from the public on what needs to be in there. Now it has to follow statutory guidelines. And then once the council says this is just what we want, it goes to the state, and the state of Maine approves it. Once that comes back from the state of Maine, those are the things we can expend our money on. When you look at those program development guidelines, they give infrastructure $1 million. The $1 million is an estimate, but the infrastructure is an allowance. So for example, in the downtown transit-oriented TIF district, we put a lot of emphasis on infrastructure for the district. Once that's approved by the state and we come back, we work our hardest to stay within it. And if we find something that's not on the development plan that we want to expend TIF dollars on, we would have to then come back and say, how much do you want to do it? And is it worth the $5,000 or $6,000 to amend the plan to go back through the whole process and have it adopted again? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. So did I answer your question? So when we normally would do that is there is some kind of a big project. Oftentimes developers will come to us because they want a credit enhancement agreement, which is different than a TIF. A credit enhancement agreement is an agreement between the town and a developer to give back all or a portion of the taxes that they pay on the new value. You can only have a credit enhancement agreement inside of a TIF district. So you have TIFs without credit enhancement agreements, but never a credit enhancement agreement without a TIF. TIFs normally run 29 years is what we,
Interesting number.
well, because it has to be less than 30. And they can be renewed, but there has to be a reason.
Okay.
Okay,
Got it. There's a development plan which goes to a public hearing and then to the council and then to the state of Maine, which approves it. And there's a whole other process if you want it adapted, and it never lasts more than 30 years. Do I have the basics?
And it's-
basics are there.
It's a great tool because we have money that doesn't get counted by the state when they go to give us our school money and our revenue share. The more valuation we have, the less money we get. So this keeps our valuation low.
So it's sheltered from any further taxation, any growth that happens within the TIF area by the state. We still collect property taxes on it and it goes into our TIF funds. Is that all
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
Okay.
The piece of when it goes into the TIF funds, whenever you see restricted funds, 99.9% of the time, when you're talking about the town of Orono and restricted funds, we're talking about the TIF funds.
Yeah, I knew we had it and I knew about the downtown area, but I live in the Webster area and I just read, I'm like, we have one. Where? What's in Webster that has a TIF? No idea.
Webster.
Right. So now I know. Thank you. Thank you. Hope that wasn't too repetitive.
And
for
we
other people.
are, yeah, and we are limited as to how much value and how much land mass we can shelter. I would have to
Hide.
go, huh?
Hide.
It's, yeah, shelter.
So,
Okay, thank you.
I had a kind of a CEA or a TIF question. Why do they fluctuate up and down? I had a simple example that one of the pages, like why would someone that has a CEA pay us or show up as revenues? It costs us because we're paying that back to them. Why would it be 95, this 95 grand and 100 next grand and then next year and then 85 the following year? Is it?
So a couple of reasons. So when we look at, for example, Rose Property, so I'm looking at the downtown transit oriented TIF district. Rose Property
Page
is the
16.
is the owner of the Stone Manor. What you saw there was an approved budget of 16.5 last year and 57,820 for this year's request. That is because the CEA is 100% based on the tax that is assessed to them. In 2022, we changed the classification in the reval from commercial to church, which meant when the FY22 bill came out, there was no church. They made the decision at that point not to turn around and supplement them because we essentially would be asking for a really big $41,000 check from the person just to turn around and give it back to them. And it seemed like an awful lot of work for that, but we have to pick it up. So in FY23, when we did the budget, we still hadn't picked up the mistake. So when they committed taxes last year, they had it right, but I didn't have the number to put there. When you see the FY23 approved budget, that is the initial approved budget. This does not include budget adjustments. So we would have adjusted the expense and revenue for the Rose Properties CEA to meet the actual expense and revenue. When you do your adopting budget orders in June, at the end of June, one of the orders that you authorize is for me to adjust the TIF credit enhancement numbers because those change. And it's a contractually obligated amount, but I might not have what that's going to be until August or September. That makes sense.
That does, because we communicated a little bit about that, but on page 20, for example, is the Durago TIF.
Yep.
So in 2020 it was 117, 2021 it went up, 2020 down, 104, 2023 it goes up. We're expecting it to go down. Are they on some kind of different? Are they on some kind of schedule, or is there actually valuations fluctuating?
So I think part of what you've got is approved budgets, again, where they're not, they haven't been adjusted for the actual expense. But that is pretty consistently, and I'm basing it on what I think the mill rate is gonna be. So if I'm estimating a 25 mill rate, which I'm not, but if I was, then that number would be a lot different if it came in at, for example, 2380.
Okay, and is there a schedule for all of the CEAs that, like, it could be 100%, they could be any percent, they could be no, zero?
So for credit enhancement agreements, the council does have general guidance that they have given. In the downtown transit oriented TIF district, there is actually credit enhancement guidelines, like formal guidelines. But it mirrors how we normally come into these conversations, which we do an analysis of the tax shift by doing a credit enhancement agreement. Those usually come in about a 54, between 50 and 55%. So council has really focused on, we don't want to give more than 50% over the life of the credit enhancement agreement as a rule of thumb. There are times like the church that was a blight and council was very concerned. So that particular one is 100% CEA. I think the whole time. I have to go back and double check, but you have Penobscot Valley Dermatology, and in our conversations with the owners there, they recognized upfront expenses that should generate income over time. So we front loaded that tip and gave more back at the beginning and less moving forward. When you look at like Webster Point, that is losing value. Therefore, the credit enhancement agreement.
Therefore, the credit enhancement agreement, what?
The payment on the credit enhancement agreement went
They're
down.
paying less taxes and we're giving less back.
Yep. Have I helped?
Yeah, and so we do usually with them, or do they typically change? So if dermatologist over 30 years, does it?
That one I think is a 20-year tip.
20-year thing, and does it go down to zero over the course? And then, so therefore, we start keeping more of what we collect and putting it into our different.
Yep. And I'm not sure it goes all the way to zero because I don't think it started all the way at
Okay,
100.
that's not what's making these
Yep.
numbers move
No.
for the most part. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And the general idea behind all of that is to enhance development and properties that we would like to see be developed, correct? To incent that.
So when you look at Bosom Pass and Sweat Living Trust, Star Property, which we no longer have that credit enhancement agreement because the property sold. But those ones are part of that downtown credit enhancement program. And our council was trying to incentivize investments in real property, real commercial properties downtown. Was the idea that if you would invest to make your property gain value, we would kick in a little bit of the extra tax we receive back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Are we going to go through the tip or are we jumping to what?
No, this is, I believe is what,
Okay.
yeah, we can do it in whatever way we want, but I think what Sophie was recommending is that let's look at materials starting
22,
really
did you
on
say
page
so?
22. And then we can go back and look within the TIFs. So the TIFs fund, if I'm understanding this correctly, so the TIFs fund essentially everything on page 22 on.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no general fund money. I do think one of the things that might not be clear in the material is one of the changes that we are pointing out or suggesting you consider is right now we have a full-time employee. Lori's giving me the eyes. We have a full-time employee who came on board, has worked at the library and as our web designer, graphics, communications person. If it's snarky on Facebook, it's probably Belle, and if it is graphically charged, it's probably Pete. But what we would like to do is, given some of the feedback we've had around communication, we'd like to shift Pete 100% into the TIF to do communications and marketing for the town. Understanding that you're picking up 0.4, so less than a half person, but we really felt like it would allow a more consistent approach, because right now, if I have messages on Monday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Monday, Thursday, Friday, I have access to a person. Otherwise, I have to beg, borrow, and steal, which Lori is incredibly kind and Pete is very flexible, but it makes it a little more difficult to do that. You know, my vision had been to try to have a director of communications and marketing that would be a higher functioning individual. When I sat down and looked what we would have to pay for that, that person would make more than my police chief does, and I just can't afford it. So this was kind of a fallback to them.
So the full-time salary line includes this individual, includes the director.
And portions of all the people I just, including the town manager.
And we are talking about the 0.6 loss from the library in the next section, is that?
Yeah, because I think the plan is to try to redistribute those hours.
Is it 0.4 or 0.6 that the library is losing for? 0.4.
Yeah, they're losing
Oh, 0.4
0.4.
shifting over,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
So he's already
16 hours.
6 in this.
Yeah.
It's his only working location at the library.
No.
It's not, he actually works here.
No, well, he does some work here. He also does remote work for us. That type of work is specifically suited for that.
Mhm. Are we on?
Did you have a question, Rob?
Yeah,
You go.
so in the overview, kind of near the front here on, where we it says staff will continue involvement in the Bangor Region Working Communities Challenge grant working on workforce development focused on underrepresented and underserved populations. I was wondering what that actually looks like. So what underserved or underrepresented populations are we?
So it's pretty broad.
Yeah.
This is a grant through the Boston Fed. And it is really looking at, the grant is looking at getting a group of people together in a region to solve problems, right? And one of the, it was put out there, and it's different from every other grant. Every other grant has a box, right? And this is a box, and you got to fall within the box and serve that certain thing. There are literally no boundaries. So what it does is it allows this group to get together and look at system change. And how do you look at system change? So one of the things that that the Bangor Region Group, which we are basically Bangor, Old Town, Brewer, and Orono, with the municipalities that are involved, but then there are other organizations. Really, we're looking at how do we increase our workforce, and where are the places that we can grow that right away. And one of the places is people that are either underemployed or aren't employed, and whether they are in recovery, whether they're coming out of incarceration, whether they are underemployed or they're struggling with lots of different things. So the goal of that is really to look at the system and see why people aren't working. What are the challenges? What are those pieces? And look at how do you move forward to change the system to allow those barriers not to be there. And it's a kind of an amoeba, because as we go through this, we have started with the idea of just finding people jobs, and then turned into, well, the issue is transportation. So, okay, well, how do we do that? The other challenge we have is when this started was right before the pandemic. As the pandemic happened and moved through it, so much money got flooded into the system with workforce, with dealing with homelessness, dealing with a lot of these challenges. It's been a lot of money put in there. So the other thing we're trying really hard not to do is overlap or look at things that aren't happening. So really, we're looking at spaces in which people are falling through the cracks and what are the barriers for those groups. So
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been most interesting to me is the fact that it's one of the few times that you're encouraged to not simply give money to an existing system, but try to look at it from end user. How does an end user make their way into the system? And it's interesting because it has brought up some conflict around some system players that desperately need the money they get to do what they do. Seeing, I think, this as a conflict for them. And so it has truly opened up some conversations that I hope will net in some system change. I also think that Mitch is underselling Orono. This initially started out as a regional effort that Bangor was the backbone for. Bangor has gone through several changes, and during that time, Mitch has really stepped up and has been the point of contact with the feds. And I'm hoping Orono can stay really connected in here, because I don't think the answer is to rebuild our systems in each one of the communities, but rather build a robust system that we can all access and get people into.
How far into this grant are we?
So it's a 3-year grant, but once again, part of this is they call it a 3-year grant and they fund it over 3 years, but the funding, it doesn't matter. The funding you get, it doesn't matter how long that takes. There was an original design phase where you were kind of testing a theory. They gave you a little bit of money, you tested a theory, and then you had some outcome, and then you went back and you applied for what they call the implementation phase, which was trying to figure that out, how to move forward. Knowing that, and there are 6 of these groups in Maine. And this has happened in New Hampshire and Rhode Island as well. So it's not just us, but so we are finishing year 1, just finished year 1, but in reality, we're probably at spending the money year 0. Because with some changes, we've had some hiccups along the way. Because to be fair, we have sat around the table a number of times looking at each other going, this isn't how we normally do it. What do we do? Right. Like, how do we do this? And so we've really tried to, since this change, we've really tried to step back, really look at what we were trying to look at and come up with a plan forward. We're in the process of hiring an initiative director to kind of carry the work. It has been, folks in the region. There's about 12 of us, that some from different organizations, but also the municipalities that have been carrying the load of the work, which is hard because you have to be in it every day. So we need a champion, and that's one of the things that we're doing. We're also at the beginning stages of a pilot with UMaine and some 3 local groups, that regional groups, Bangor Housing, I forget them all their names, Together Place, and another one of the groups. Working with them, UMaine has 200 openings and massive different types of openings. So bringing those to, HR and those groups together to talk about, well, we have some people that maybe, what are the barriers here? You require a driver's license for every one of your jobs. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know that that's the case. Is that a requirement that has to happen? Transportation is an issue. Is there a way we can overcome this to both help the university, but also help? And we as a group do not want to be a program. We are trying to, for us is to collect data on what are the issues here and where do we go with it. So, I mean, we're kind of at the beginning stages, although we've been in it for 1.5 years. So.
Oh, thank you. And I'll look forward to hearing more about sort of what kind of data actually is collected on this.
Yeah, that's great to hear about. Thanks for asking that question, Rob.
Thank you.
Before we dive into the TIF specifically, are there any more questions about this section of the budget or any of the annotated, any of the notes annotating costs?
I have one quick question on page 24. It's just it's a very small special community projects. It just sparked for me how many people had mentioned to me about Orono days and how much they miss it, and is it coming back? And are we budgeting for it to come back? Could it come back? Is that something that would be economic development if it came back? Is budget, or where would it go? And is it in the budget?
It all depends on what it looks like.
Mhm.
If it is small, community focused, fun at Webster Park, probably not funded out of this budget. If it is something that involves businesses bringing people into like massive, like a lot of outside marketing, trying to bring people into Orono, probably. I think that is a catch-all. If we ended up deciding we wanted to have some huge event that would qualify for TIF and there wasn't enough money here, one of the beautiful things about the TIF budget is it's not a one and done budget. So if council decided it wanted a festival day or an Orono days, you could decide that, tell us what it looks like. We could tell you where it could be funded from. If we needed more money out of the TIFs, you could simply do a council order to do that.
Okay.
Midway through.
But currently there isn't anything in the budget for any festival days or Orono days or.
So
anything.
I'm not, and I will just tell you, anything that couldn't be absorbed as a fairly small event would probably take would take about a year.
Yeah, and so I didn't know how much Orono days cost when we had.
So when we had it, the last number I remember quoting was almost $11,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so let's bounce back to page maybe 14, page 15. And these are the figures specific to the downtown TIF.
I was curious on the Black Bear Express line, why so little had been expended this past year. I mean, it's a significant cost usually.
So I'm gonna take that one.
You can.
So the Black Bear Express, there are two reasons why it is so low right now. First one is that the city of Bangor lags in its billing considerably. The second reason is because of ridership, there were modifications made to the hours that the bus was traveling. So what we had budgeted was based on full service. They modify it because of ridership and also because of drivers available. So outside of critical time, Monday through Friday during critical hours, the community connector might not be able to staff the Black Bear Express. So when they limit their hours overall, we kind of shrunk our hours to make it easier for them to ensure that we had something. Because I think from, so there's a community group, it's university, somebody from the two housing developments that contribute to the Black Bear, and town, as well as I think Lisa Feldman is still on that group. But that group kind of together creates an advisory team because it's not all town money that funds the bus.
If we saw increase in ridership and drivers became available to staff more runs, how would we respond to that? Like, are we nimble enough in this budget to say?
So the downtown transit oriented TIF district has a budget balance predicted at year end of about $500,000. So while I'm not sure I'll hit full $500,000, and I know that we're going to have a decrease in the value in the downtown TIF because the dam decreases in value each year. And we lost the hotel as a going concern. And we'll have 1 year off and then we'll have another going concern there. So I do anticipate a decrease in value. My estimates, and Mitch and I looked at this with the assessor, so I hope it's accurate, is that what is in the TIF budget for this year would be covered with what's predicted to come in.
Okay.
So that will still give us some amount of.
Okay, I just was thinking back to our conversation about wanting to increase ridership and increase participation in public transportation and
That's,
cut ourselves off before we even started.
well, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're fortunate that it's funded out of the TIF, simply because with the general fund, you go once and that's it. You can't.
Rob, if it makes you feel better, I paid a bill today for it. About $20,000.
All right, yes. No, I was just curious. It was an anomaly.
Any other questions about the downtown TIF?
Which page are you on exactly?
I was on
15
15 and
16?
16.
So no matter which of these budgets I'm looking at, it's gonna tell me everything that we're paying out of this TIF budget. So this year, the total amount we're paying out of the downtown TIF budget is this 699 net projected next year.
Yes,
Okay. And is there amount that carries over in these lines each year? Or does these lines have to be,
so
figured
I
out each year?
thought it might not have gotten in here. I thought that I gave you a TIF projection.
I don't know.
I did a TIF projection, so let me,
It's probably in here somewhere. I just
It
was
might
curious
not
because
be.
I haven't understood. These are budgets where we're not required to spend every bit that's in them at the end of each year. So we carry over money in each of these budgets from year to year, correct?
so it's not. So carry forward is a technical term.
So, okay, don't use that
So
term. Use the
don't-
correct term, Sophie.
Program development funds. So if you can imagine that the money we get, that is the money, the restricted tax dollar that comes in, that the resident is paying, is deposited into the program development fund. Everything that we expend is coming out of that fund. And although you're appropriating a budget for the year, those dollars come out on an as spent basis. And let me just real quick, just in case we had so much paper flying around that this didn't make its way in.
Did you say
Great.
679? Because it's 859.
Oh, sorry, I was on the first page. My mistake. I didn't probably get to the. What page are you on?
859 is all of it.
21.
Yeah, I'm on a different budget. I was looking back on page 16.
So when we look at, looking at what we think the value is gonna be, what we think we're gonna bring in taxes, which are two really large thinks. We then say that's the new money in. We then would say, what was the beginning balance estimated? I'm sorry. How much money did we bring in? What was the beginning audited balance? And how much have you authorized in expenditures?
Right.
So just assuming we spent every dime that was authorized, I am projecting that at the end of the year, in the downtown and transit oriented TIF district, we're gonna have a balance of $625,000. I am estimating in the Envision Net TIF, a balance of $126,000. That is one that we would want to build up because that is slated, that's used for infrastructure improvements. Penobscot Valley Dermatology has a balance of 108. Would have a balance of. So that kind of gives you a sense.
And so I didn't catch the name, but one of them you mentioned we want to build up because there's infrastructure things coming.
Envision Net.
Yeah, okay, great. But for example, on the downtown area one where there is money, if someone had a great idea about something to add to the budget for economic development purposes, that's something they could bring to you or Mitch and talk about.
Yeah, so the way the TIF money works, Sarah, is much like any other reserve account, which people can come, we can vet it for that is allowable or not allowable. If it's allowable, we bring it to council and there would have to be a council order to allow us to expend the money.
Okay. It's just helpful. And you are going to send us those figures so we know what's in the.
Yeah.
funds. And you're projecting those numbers for the end of FY 24?
On end of FY 23.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
Just a couple lines on the Webster TIF. If there's any questions there?
Their valuation dropped down quite a bit, like went from 40 to 20
Where are you?
on the Webster.
Page 17.
Yeah, yep. Well, that's what happens when you have lots that have been permitted to be buildable lots that the developer walked away from. And when they walked away from them, it turned them into green space and that can't be developed. So it
A
really.
different developer, they're not allowed to be. Okay, thanks.
Penobscot Valley Dermatology TIF, page 18. The EnvisionNet TIF on page 19. No changes projected. And the Dirigo TIF on page 20 with slight reduction. In the Orono Basin TIF on page 21. Okay, so we can go back and revisit those if people have questions, but let's jump back to where we were. We talked about code enforcement. Yeah, I want to make sure that I'm not just skipping anything. Not trying to rush us through. I just want to save time for the meaty stuff.
Do that all the way through community development.
Right, so page 20. Yep, so we are to the public library summary starts on page 28.
I wonder if before we get into that, I could just remind, we've got some members of the public here tonight, which is lovely. And there is opportunity to ask questions or give comments during these workshops.
Sure.
So wanted to remind people of that, if anyone has questions or comments.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions in general about the library before we start looking at the budget lines? Lori is here to help us through it. I guess I'd ask Lori how you see we've seen a shift into, as you've explained to us many times, right? More ebooks, different levels of access to all kinds of different media. And do you track the use of each so you can see where you're growing and where you're not growing?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that COVID was a silver lining in this respect. So it really put those digital services out there to the public, and they were using them. I mean, they were using them, and they continue to use them. It doesn't mean that they're not coming in the library as well.
Yeah.
So, and at a time when we are really punched for space, you'll see in my budget, I've zeroed the lines for audiobooks as well as music, because it can all be done online. We're also seeing the use of physical audiobooks and music especially going down.
Yeah.
So putting money into the digital content is making more sense at this point.
Have any sense of what time your digital resources are being, like, are people accessing your digital collection outside of the scheduled library hours?
That I don't have. It does. Most of them do daily, and I don't know. I haven't dug in to see. I can look and see if it does it by hour. I think Canopy might. You know, there's a graph that you can see at what time people. Actually, I did look at that once, and I was noticing there was someone using it at 2 a.m. So, but I haven't looked at that in depth. But I would be happy to do that.
question, maybe more for Sophie, it's come up a few times about minimum staffing levels, both in the town office as well as the library. And one of the suggestions of possible reductions was partial reduction of subs, and then the explanation talks about the need to potentially close the library to do that and whatnot. And I guess I'd like to understand a little bit more about what's the rationale on minimal staffing levels?
It depends on the department. For the
Library.
library, Lori and I have actually talked quite extensively about that, and it's really around a minimum staffing level of 2. I want 2 people at the library. If somebody falls shelving a book or has an issue, I'd like somebody else there.
I can speak a little bit to it too, because we wait on patrons when when they're there. And I have staff that get really anxious if there's a lineup of 3 people. And I've said, you know what? There are no library emergencies. It's okay. Just take care of them one at a time. But that doesn't account for if there's a kid in the bathroom throwing up and needs help, and then there are 3 people at the front desk. So there are emergencies that do happen that need to be attended to. And it can be a staff member, but it could also be a patron. Safety wise too, just knowing that there's a second person there. So the example, I saw something happening in front of the library one day that looked like it was a crime happening. And as I ran by Louise's desk, I said, please call the police. I couldn't do that and go and find out if it was really, does that make sense?
I guess I don't know, like I think about what used to be the case even next door here. I remember there was a single person working in taking money till all hours of the night, even 24 hours. And obviously we tend to think Orono, and Orono is kind of a bubble. The Bangor Library is a very different scene than the Orono Library. I could much more understand.
We still get a
Much
certain
different
percentage.
concerns.
Yeah.
What's that?
We still get a certain percentage. We don't get what they get, but it's not that we don't get some coming through the door that cause some concern. The other piece to think about is we're not just checking books out in and out. We're not just waiting on patrons. There is a lot of behind the scenes work that gets done. I think of Louise as circulation manager. I think that she could work all week without waiting on a patron, which she doesn't. She can't because we're all waiting for patrons. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work that needs to get done that really can't get done if you're there alone.
So when we close due to somebody, because we only have one person, is someone still in there working? That's where I'm thinking
okay.
about this. If the idea is, we don't have a sub to come in for a few hours, so we're just gonna close because we can't have one person there. Does that mean someone's still in there doing all this back office stuff, or does it
Not
mean we
necessarily,
close?
not
And-
necessarily.
And that's more I guess I could see it being a policy, and that's what we shoot for, but I'm just wondering if it has to be a shutdown situation. I don't think with 44 hours at total being open, I don't think we want to be, obviously you guys don't want to, no one wants to be closing down. So that's how I'm looking at it.
So we have a policy that people aren't supposed to be there alone, even when we're closed. However, there have been times when something like that has happened, not specifically that, but there's a snowstorm or whatever. Say Louise is already there and she really doesn't want to trudge home. She doesn't have the access online to do things. So what I've asked her to do is check in with me, call me when you leave. Call me. And I know if you don't call me by 5 o'clock, then something's wrong, and I'm going to come check on you. So work can get done. There is an example a few weeks ago, I was working the evening with a substitute. I don't usually do that, but we were short staffed. So I took on the evening. He never showed up. So we closed, I went home. So there are different instances, different circumstances that the work still can get done.
Well, and the work getting done is obviously important, but I guess I'm more interested in being open the hours that we say we're gonna be open and not having to close if it's 2 hours of finishing up on our own.
So
Because I
right
think-
now, it's pretty rare that that happens. I mean, that, me closing that evening hadn't happened
No.
before. We did have a situation with illness, with people on vacation. Did we actually close in an afternoon? I'm trying to
Yeah,
remember.
that was scheduled in it, not scheduled as in we knew when we
Yeah,
agreed to all that,
Yeah.
but somebody got sick.
Yeah.
We knew that we were not gonna have the coverage and we don't have the budget to pay overtime.
right.
And the only people that were left were full-time people who already had 40 hours.
So I appreciate your concern, and we certainly think about that a lot, that we want hours that are convenient for people, and we want to be dependable, and that's why we've made the hours consistent. If you look back 5 or 6 years ago, we weren't open on Monday mornings, or we weren't open on Wednesday mornings, and we still have people come through the door say, oh, it's Monday and you're open. When did that happen? Well, it happened years ago. So we're trying to make the hours more consistent. And also thinking about those people who can't get there between 10 and 5. So that's why we have the 2 evenings. That's why we try not to look at closing on Saturdays. And try and keep that staffed. And that's where substitutes come in.
But the budget as presented would allow us to do what we
Yes.
have been doing.
Yep.
I think just recently, when we had to close, and I think I sent everybody shot everybody an email about that. That was really unusual to have 2 sick people, somebody on vacation, and somebody at a conference or
Yes.
something
Yeah.
like that. Unusual.
So the way the budget is now, teaching all the staff that we have and the substitutes at the level that we have, that would continue to be an unusual circumstance.
So I'm thinking of it in terms of the consideration of the 48.99 reduction that was presented to us when we asked for possible reductions. And wondering if, and of course, now you've got another 0.4 that's being transferred, so that I guess adds to the degree of difficulty.
It would get, I mean, if I couldn't fill that with the people I have, it would get more difficult to stay open,
But you do
6
have
days a
people
week.
who are Interested to take. on those
I haven't
hours.
had the opportunity to talk to all of them, but I'm
We
hopeful.
probably wouldn't have that discussion until we knew that council was gonna
Right.
support.
Yeah, so it's not that they would go down in any staffing at the library. It's just that Pete would shift his hours and somebody else would move into his existing library.
Right, I think what Leo's asking though is the possible reduction in substitute.
Yes, I understood that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
And we do depend on them to fill in when there's illness or when there's vacation.
To ensure that there are 2 people.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
One of the lines that you have underspent in 2023 is the furniture and fixtures expenses.
So we put that line in there a few years ago, knowing that the building and all of the furnishings and whatnot, they're all aging. But we don't necessarily have, how much is in there this, sorry. Not every year are we going to have that much to
Okay.
spend, but we like, it's nice to have it there in case the chair breaks, and those library chairs are expensive.
So it's almost a, so you're not planning on, I guess I just want to make clear, you're not planning on going out and buying all new furniture.
No.
That is a contingency in case you need
We
some.
did buy new chairs a few years ago. But right, it's a contingency just in case. We don't have more space for new things, but we're not replacing things unless we need to.
Thank you.
Other questions about the library?
Did we look at what all the cut suggestions also?
Well, that's
Doing it at the
what
same
I'm,
time?
that's what I'm
Yeah.
asking.
Yeah, I
This
just
is
want to take a quick.
where some of those cuts were.
Right.
The other suggestion was reducing the delivery by 1 day,
Yeah.
which would be a hardship on some people, and it's people that come to depend on that delivery. Well, the story when we first moved in 2009, that summer, the vendor who did the delivery stopped doing it, just said we can't do it for the amount that you're paying us. And we had 6 weeks of no interlibrary loan, and that is the only time I've really seen angry library patrons.
But this would be looking at instead of interlibrary delivery 5 days a week, 4 days. Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks.
Can I just interrupt and remind everybody that you are not just talking to each other in the room, but you're also speaking to the recording and to Zoom land. And sometimes your volume is drifting down.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there were,
Thanks. I think that's it.
those were the two not recommended cuts, but there were 3 sections in this document where cuts to library services
Mhm.
could have been considered, right? So that reduce the library delivery budget, reduce library substitutes, and eliminate library substitutes. And our plan is, as we began tonight, to review in subsequent weeks, service level adjustments, if council wants to entertain those. So we can talk about those things now, but we'll also plan on talking about those at the beginning of our next budget workshop. If we want to think about it, put it in context and revisit some of those things. I don't want to cut off conversation, but I don't want to sit here with these things in front of us if nobody is prepared to comment on them now. Any other discussion about the library then? Great, thank you. Very much. Moving on to page 44, which is Parks and Recreation Department budget. We've had a number of discussions with members of the public in council about Parks and Recreation this year. So I think maybe we can talk in general about the introduction to Parks and Rec before we dive into the numbers.
Ask my same question on page 45. Was I right when I looked later that 75% of the manager's salary is billed to economic development, or did I get that wrong? Some percentage?
So. That's an old. I changed that at the last minute. I think it's. 75, I changed that at the last minute, I'm sorry. It's 75% is charged to Parks and Recreation.
Okay, and 25 is the economic development. I read it backwards. Thank you.
No, that's my fault.
Thank you.
But Parks and Recreation.
Yeah.
One of the sections that I was really interested in is how we do outreach and deliver services to elderly as well as youth sports, population and stuff like that, and talk about maybe restarting that program or being in conversations.
Yes, so we had started those conversations in March with that population, and since that March meeting, we have started some coffee hours for folks. It's free for anyone in the community, but is at 10 a.m. to 11 to kind of market to people who may be retired. During those discussions, people have been giving feedback about what they might want to see. We have found that transportation is a very difficult challenge for a lot of those populations, and trying to find ways that promote maybe an activity including transportation. So maybe the activity is offsite or field trip based, but including that transportation piece is something they're really looking at seeing. Some were interested in having balance or Tai Chi type programs geared towards their age group. But a lot of differencing in a lot of different modes there, but the coffee hours that we started have been really useful. And in the new programs line, we have added an additional funds in that budget to include potential additions for that population as well as others in town.
Just comment that it is really great to see that that's been kicked off. I have heard some feedbacks from at least an attendee, and it's been very positive. Told me all about the bus going, and so I think that's, so that's once a month is the start, is what we're talking
So
about.
coffee time is every Tuesday, except for the last Tuesday of the month of, we had one in April, May and June. The bus trip takes as many as we can fit on the bus over to the IGA. So people are able to get groceries. There are other participating businesses like the Dunkin' Donuts and businesses in that area where people can go and have coffee there or have lunch at Wendy's or get their groceries done, and we will take them back to the Birch Street building here.
Has that already happened?
It has happened once for the month of April. We had a travel budget put in this budget before COVID that had continued to carry over that I was able to use and test some of these waters to get some feedback from the public.
How was the attendance on the bus?
The first bus trip was a little bit low. Again, getting to the Birch Street has posed some challenges, but we're working with Sierra Bus to provide that bus. They have been really flexible with whatever it seems to be needed within that window of time we're renting the bus for. So we're looking at making kind of a rotation of stops instead of just the one. So as we continue getting the feedback people are very vocal and they're very honest about what they need. So that's been wonderful for my staff and my team. And we've had different staff members come to those coffee times as well, which has been fun for the people attending.
Just the social, it's great.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to read this in here and hear about it on the street, so to speak. Or are we just kind of randomly asking questions that we had about this, or what?
Well, I thought at the beginning, right, there's this general introduction to all the big programs, and new programs, continuing programs. So I thought that might be a good place to start. And then we can dive into the budget lines, but we can skip right to the budget lines.
No, I wasn't even going to do that. I was going to ask, there's three ways we deliver services. I am curious what percentages are, because I mean, back when my kids went through, I think everything was through the rec locally. And maybe they're partners for horse riding and a few things, but we've got a pretty extensive list here. What are the three delivery methods that we refer to them as? Mainly, I'm looking to understand which ones are delivered by us. Town sponsored, I think is the term we're using. Town sponsored is our oversight, our finance control. Versus collaborative, which is main primarily and contracted stuff. So from this great list, what is the youth soccer still delivered by us?
On page 47.
Oh, sorry.
On this one.
From the 47.
Thank you. So youth soccer, for instance, that one does have some main partnership with that. The rec department schedules, communicates with volunteers, which would be the coaches, gets the teams organized. However, soccer and some of the games are often off hours in the normal kind of working set of hours. So what we've worked with UMaine for is to have site supervisors to those events, both at practices and games. If someone gets hurt, they have the list of everyone who needs to be contacted. If someone doesn't come for pickup, we have someone there to make sure that there is an adult there present and to try and take some of the burden off coaches so they can really just come and coach. The other thing that they will help us with is if we do have a lot of interest in participation, but less interest in coaching, we're able to reach out to the university and try and fill those positions so we don't have to make any changes to the program from a kid's perspective.
And would that be the same for flag football, field hockey?
Yes.
Lacrosse? Stuff?
It does depend a little bit program to program. Lacrosse, for instance, that's a partnership with Penobscot Nation. The university is not involved in that program. The flag football, RSU had been part of that program as lending us some of their coaches' time to come and visit the potential football players to work on skills. So it depends a little bit on program to program, but the youth sports as a whole, the university does support.
So does that mean the revenue from the registration goes to the university in that scenario?
So our youth sports programming, except for that programming, that is special, like lacrosse, like disc golf was a special one that we did that the town takes responsibility for. Those are contracting programs. They're done through the university. If we have been supporting them to the degree that has been articulated here, then we have an operational issue because that is not the way those programs are supposed to be run.
Okay, so the norm is that we're actually contracting that out to the university.
Yeah,
And the
we're
exception would be, sometimes there are exceptions like the youth lacrosse we sponsored and we partnered with the Penobscot Nation, but we were the central organizers. Okay,
so when we partner with the university, they're using our sign-up program. Our job is to be overseeing the participant satisfaction, to make sure that to help gain volunteer coaches and to help with that. But the scheduling, all of the logistics, all of the program support for those youth sports are the primary responsibility is the university.
and we take in the money and then pay the university as a contractor? Okay. Is that typically about equal what we take in and what we pay out, or does it vary a lot?
So they get the contract that the council agreed to is they get 100% of the sport revenue.
Thank you.
I got lots more questions there, I guess, but
Thanks.
including, I got a question about the credit card fees, but do we absorb those credit card fees and they get all, is that taken out?
So right now, the way the existing contract is written, we absorb it all. I will tell you that when that comes up for renegotiation, that will be a point of discussion because it's a considerable amount of money.
It's, yeah.
But
I mean,
a lot of that credit card fees also has to do with the after-school program. That is why, and we maintain 100% of that revenue. That's,
So afternoons, after school program, we maintain the revenue.
and we
They
pay.
run it, so it's not part.
Yeah, so, you know, not every single business contract is the same. And youth sports are falls under one contract. After school falls under another contract. Parks and Rec staff have a much closer oversight and view of after school. That is our responsibility. We are contracting labor for that. They are simply labor for after school.
So that's our program.
That's our program.
That runs up there.
No,
It does.
It runs at the elementary school.
Oh, the rad camp things run up there.
so that's a different program. That's summer day camp. And for people who don't have the history, there was a time when Orono Parks and Rec ran a summer camp and they ran a summer camp on campus. And we were fighting for essentially the same kids to be part of that program, and neither one of us were thriving. So we came together, and the agreement that we have with that one is a cost share. So I think it's 80, 85, 15, somewhere in that neighborhood. And we, by doing it that way, one of the things we were trying to do was control the cost, because we were at a point where we weren't going to be able to fund and support that program here, especially given the school became more active in the summer, and that was kind of one of the housing where we were housing him. So that one, we do a cost share. We deal with all the sign up issues. They deal with all the logistics of camp issues. And there are consistent check-ins, weekly or more than weekly check-ins of that. But that's a revenue share. So what we bring in is split.
And they keep 85 and we keep 50. Got it.
But they pay all the staff.
Yeah, I got
We
it.
don't
They're
pay
doing the
any-
staffing and they're running it. We're doing registration. Got it.
And we have a say in the registration fee, which I think was one of our most important hits.
Thank you.
Where does the rink live in the budget?
The rink is in the Parks and Rec budget. It is on page 54.
Those one. Do you want the box or do you want the line item?
We create the one with the comments, so
I
I.
like the box. I'm going for the box.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And so I guess my question is answered in the annotation is that this is a cost to do for the maintenance program to replace the rotten boards. It is not a rebuild of the rink.
Yeah, so I think that's in there because we definitely had feedback that the rink looks horrible. We can't really come to a conclusion on what to do with it. So this was kind of that interim aesthetic facelift, I suppose. And to be clear, it is not fixing the issue. It's just making it look better.
But it is one of the issues. That end where all the boards are up off the ground makes it hard to ice in there. So it is one of the issues to getting the ice going.
So making ice, there are many different ways. And this is the challenge. Mother Nature plays the biggest role. Boards not being quite on the ground don't have as big a effect. It's not like the water runs out because you make it in layers without that there. So it doesn't have to be to the ground. The challenge more is about level, right? I mean, if the ground is not level, you've got to put a lot of water down to get it. I think that's some of it. And the boards, realistically, the way that we make ice currently, the boards being on the ground don't necessarily matter unless we don't get snowbanks and the pucks fluttering, which most people don't like, but right. So I mean, as we build that up, we don't like, it's not like the little rink where you fill it up and it freezes. It's more of a layered approach. It's just a different way to do it. And those two ways are disputed a lot. So, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to do it. So, but I, in all honesty, with the way that we make it, the boards not being to the ground don't have a significant effect.
But is that that's what we're talking about replacing chips, not the.
We're talking about the actual board, some of the boards all around are rotten, not making the boards down.
And on page 53, if we're up to there yet, are we on the additional money on the credit card fees? I just wanted to know how much of this are you thinking we are getting back by increased enrollments? Because I know you've been speaking about the after school programs growing a lot. Is some of this extra $8,000 likely to be recouped in more fees we're getting from after school, or is this really 800 out of pocket with nothing more coming in?
So recouped is a tough word to use if we're gonna do technical terms.
Again, you go technical, I'll just go normal speak. So
I getcha. Expense budget is the expense budget.
Yeah.
And the
I understand.
revenue budget is separate. But if we want to talk about net,
sure, do that.
we expect the net cost of after school, including the credit card fees, to just about break.
Equal out. Okay, thank you.
And credit card fees are based on the purchase. So
Sure.
if you don't make it, it doesn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which, when I was seeing the credit card fees, I thought that can't be. That 2.5%, that's $345,000. I was thinking of soccer, youth basketball.
So it's
Right. We don't do that.
it's after school and it's
Summer
summer camp that are really driving those numbers.
So after school and summer camp, and then presumably that's where because the scholarship kind of surprised me as well. 175 going to 232. Is what we're budgeting for scholarships. 135,000, 175, and 232 for next year.
Is that again because of our numbers going up so much though in the after school funding?
For scholarships, we're budgeting 1,000 and 1,000. Are you talking? what do you-
Page 50.
Page 50.
That's what I remember seeing.
Are you down one line to see hundreds of thousands? From year to date to manager's request, maybe?
Oh,
Parks and, oh, that's the,
page
sorry,
50.
that's the freaking total.
Okay, all right.
Somebody gonna do what?
I was like, a lot of scholarship.
How we made that back. That's a total. Parks and Rec. All right.
Dodge that.
So I'm going to suggest, because I was confused in the pagination and we've had some other questions. Maybe we should, and this is the largest section that we're covering tonight. Maybe we should do one page, discuss it, put that to bed if we can, and then move on. So if we are comfortable with the discussion over salaries and
52.
yeah, that's pages 51 and 52. Credit card fees are page 53. So we have had that discussion. Ice rink is 54. If there are other things on page 54, trail maintenance includes landing, which we've discussed before, vehicle costs, maybe we can address those.
I just wanted to say, when I read the summary of this, I was so impressed by the number of volunteers helping to do all these great things. So big shout out to whoever those volunteers are. Thank you.
So excited to see that we're projecting only $700 in vehicle maintenance.
And the travel thing that went up from 300. What was, did we talk about that?
So, one of the things that has been brought to my attention is that we have not been participating in regional and state professional groups the way that we should and the benefit of those. So what is coming back is the ability for the rec director to do that, but no. Sometimes, so let me just say with the current reimbursement rates, that isn't a lot. And the reason it's not a ton is because when possible, we use the rec truck to take those trips. But there are times when that just can't happen because the rec truck is needed to support programming. Is that right?
So we're on page 54.
Yes, 54.
So on trail maintenance, we allocating 6,000 for this. It seems like each year we're like, 2022, our actual was only $207. This year to date is $90. Wondering why we're allocating that much for it.
Couple of reasons. Number one, I think you've got Brownies Beach that's probably trail that I think is still ongoing, which we will pay for out of here. So the trail committee gets together and they create a plan. That's a volunteer group working with Megan. Dave Thompson is the chair of that committee. They get a plan, and some years that plan is we've done our spring walk and we need, or our fall walk, and we need to do 2 bridges or 3 bridges. The problem is that with $6,000, that is gone very, very quickly. So this year I do anticipate all of that going with the Brownies Beach trail fix, which is not done yet, but it's supposed to be done before.
Does that include erosion along the riverfront?
What was that?
Does that include erosion control along the?
Have you been working with Rob on that one?
I have been working with Rob. I would be happy to share some of the plans he had. I don't know off the top of my head, but
Yeah, we don't
I
have to do it.
have been working with him and can share that.
So you're actually expecting that line to actually happen before our budget closes this year? And you're keeping the same amount in it for next year? Do you have a specific project that you already know you're thinking of doing next year, or is it there just to see what comes up?
We had some requests from the public about the high school trails lot and the adaptability for skiing in that area. The Trails Committee is putting together a plan of what maybe that would look like in places that we could accommodate requests and places where maybe that's not so feasible due to vernal pools or habitat and things like that. The other area the Trails Committee has expressed a lot of interest in working on is the Jeremiah Colburn lot. Those trails have started to, it's the lot in between Forest and Bennick, more or less. There is a trail system in there. Those trails, I believe to my knowledge, they were supposed to be looked at a little bit before COVID, and then COVID happened and that has been pushed and pushed. Those trails are getting narrower and narrower and it's harder to enjoy them and recreate there. So to return that space back to the original purpose is a high priority of theirs as well.
It's a great area. I taught a class out there for a year on Sundays in those trails. I just didn't know what they were called. Thank you.
Are we good? Any more questions on page 54? Rules landing or anything else?
Just, can I just go back to the rec for a second? Just generally, we've got 2025 is when that contract's up. 5-year contract.
I think it was a 4-year
Four.
contract.
And I think generally I've heard in council meetings, we feel it's going famously. I've heard maybe some of both but I haven't heard much from people. That's normal, but I guess I'm curious, do we, all of the booking revenue does go through us?
Yeah.
And do we envision, it sounds like we do, for one, capturing back those fees for credit cards, but do we feel like it's a good value? Like, is a lot of revenue going to the university that we could be leveraging, or we don't see that anywhere in here? Correct?
Yeah, so for our revenue, which I think we can get a breakdown, Zach can do that for us because that's the MyRec system. So yes, overall, I think we're paying a lot less to the university than we would pay for a person to oversee that work. If you consider we have one Megan and one Sean to oversee an awful lot of different things happening in the community, along with trails, amenities and things like that. The relationship with the university allows us this long bench, does not tap our HR systems for having to hire and onboard and manage those people, and allows us to leverage more outside that contract as a result of the fact we have that relationship. Some of these special clinics, pop-up things that we are able to get, are those voluntolders? Not really volunteers, but
Through some of the university's programs, students can be rewarded in different ways for volunteer work. So there is a very high drive for volunteerism for a lot of students that we work with.
I think there's also the intangible of a way to knit the community and the town together. When you see students participating with community members in ways that they have not in the past, I think that also helps meet a different mission outside of Parks. But, you know, when we had this level of programming, and I'm gonna say, I think our level of programming is capping. I think we're offering the community more today than we were when I got here. And we are able to do that without a 20-hour-a-week rec sports programmer that was here when I got here. So if you look at the cost of a 20-hour-a-week person at the going rate right now, I don't think you could fill that and per diems or the volunteer stuff. You know, people maybe are complaining to you. I have yet to hear a complaint about the actual service of university providing the service. I will also say, knowing that the service level was a concern by some members in the community when council adopted the initial contract, Megan and Sean and Mitch are very careful in ensuring that we're reaching that quality service level. And if we're not, they need to know. But we haven't heard it.
So Sophie, when we did run it in-house, we had 2.5 Parks and Rec people plus like per diem people. So now we have 2.
So
right?
we had a rec director, we had a rec programmer who did mostly after school. We had a rec sports programmer that averaged anywhere from 25 to 33 hours a week. I've seen it in the budget different ways. And we had a facilities tech person who we have that actually the same person, just now attached to facilities, because when I got here, Parks and Rec also tried to manage facilities, which.
So it was like 2.5 plus 1 full-time facilities person.
Yep.
And some per diem hour things for coaches.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
We're on, I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the material on page 54 before we go on to 55. Okay, on page 55, we have programming for senior citizens, which you've already discussed, contractor services, which is the porta potties. And then a couple lines in there for other sort of undefined programs, community arts and special projects, along with the rec sports.
I was wondering, I'm interested a little in the community arts and special projects line, but I was also interested in the new programs line, which comes up next, and the description's cut off on that one, Sophie. That's one of those chopped off ones. I
Nice.
was wondering if you could maybe read the description of the new programs line to us. I didn't know if, I'm trying to sort out what's in which of the lines. Would that be helpful?
So, sure, on page 55, you've got community arts.
We can see that one. And I can see, yeah.
You want to go to 56?
Do you mind? Does anyone mind if we scroll
I don't
and
mind.
come back to 55? Okay, thank you.
So that one is, I see. It is cut off. So with this increase, the department would look to add 3 additional programs to the current offerings. The addition of an after-school ski program at Herman Mountain. The lacrosse program, which is new for 2023, is in a pilot phase right now. And there is a potential that this program would need more support in the future. We'd like to compensate for that here. We're missing one. We'd like to add 3 additional programs.
Correct. At the time of writing this,
To be determined what the third one is.
correct. Yes.
I think when I look at this, Sarah, it's more than just 3 programs. When sitting through community meetings and talking with people who are not happy with the level of Parks and Rec programming, there are lots of reasons for it that we don't have to dissect tonight. But one of the big issues is when somebody comes in and they want to do, I don't know, robotics. That's probably a bad example, but they want to run a program. And I have no money and no ability to turn on a dime for that. You want a Tai Chi class, sometimes it takes upfront costs to be able to get that going. So what we thought is that this $10,000 allows us to put some of those new programs in that we're not exactly sure what they're gonna look like. Whereas even the ski program, we're still trying to figure out how that would work for us. But mostly that flexibility, if you want to do something, I'll have the ability to maybe do that. And some of the money, some of the reason that we've been able to be flexible at the end of this year or the second half of this year is it became very apparent that we weren't going to be able to rent space at the university as we had anticipated. So we had a $10,000 budget line to rent space. And what we've said is, we have that money, let's not waste it. We now can do things like rent a bus or buy coffee and cookies or, things like that.
So it allows for some agility and flexibility in the year.
I
And it maybe goes to some of those things that were in the earlier write-up. I saw, like, we might have a ski program, we might have dance or karate, or that was some of those early things. And those are mostly programs that don't exist right now that might be added.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've kind of come up against, people want dance. I'm gonna use dance as the example, right? And well, we had dance. Mary Drew put ballet on for a long time. And that was a contracted service, has always been a contracted. She rented the space or had a contract. If there aren't people out there that want to do that, we need to tap somebody on the shoulder and say, we're willing to pay a stipend to you to put this program on. So we're paying people to do things that we haven't had to pay to do those things. So we had a wonderful karate instructor for a long time for the town.
Wanted too much money?
No, he was on a contract. And evidently there are issues around bringing somebody's business from a dojo into another space that can create issues. But if we say, we'll pay you X number of dollars to do that, and there may or may not be revenue on the other side, because the other thing that we're trying to do is keep our prices low.
Thank you. That
Well,
helped.
my understanding is that 10, I think that's great, having a plate, and it really is a placeholder, because we don't theoretically ski program, the way they ran it this year, it didn't cost, everyone paid for it. It can be different when we're doing it, so. But the lacrosse stipend did kind of throw me off a little bit, just thinking there's the potential for lacrosse compensation.
So there may or may not be. I think the issue with that is this is a pilot. We're going there to do this work with the nation. If they wanted to do it this way again, that's great. One of the things that we're identifying that some people have talked about is that's a great thing, but they don't have any way to get there. So then we think about, do we need to rent a bus? Do we need to do something else with that? So it's not about trying to sit here and do this. It's more about,
Grease and Jeff's palm over here.
Yeah. It's more about that flexibility of sometimes you got to start something to know whether or not it's going to take off, to then be able to fund itself to move on. And sometimes you can't charge people a lot of money to start something that they don't know if they want.
Seems like usually those are sort of organic. Somebody gets a hair and wants to, one big lacrosse person wants to do something, but I would, with regards to transportation, I do hope we can maybe start some conversations with the school and possibly get access to their vans here or there if needed, or that would be a first go for us when we're looking for transportation. They're there in COVID funds, I believe. They're our community. So that would be a great.
That sounds like a wonderful idea.
I think it's a great idea. I have a sort of a follow-up to this line. I really love this idea of having some flexibility and agility and being able to build new things. I really like the idea that, as you were saying, you don't always know the first year you start something, like how it's going to work. And sometimes you need a little bit of funds to get that figured out. It kind of connects. I've had this other idea as I've been listening to the community this winter a lot, and I don't know if it fits here. I've also heard suggested that maybe it would fit actually on the council budget line itself. But I just wanted to put it out to my fellow councilors that I'm interested in a small fund that would be for community building initiatives, for new community building initiatives that people might have. That might be arts project downtown, that might be, I mean, I think about Artsapalooza, which now goes. But when it first started, I know it might have been helpful to them to have a little seed money to get going. I don't know if they got seed money to begin with, but
I mean,
Right.
we sponsor Artsapalooza
I know.
not the sponsor, but we are a sponsor of Artsapalooza. And that's not a deviation from what we already do.
yeah,
When the Caribou Bog race folks remember to bill us, we also sponsor the race,
Yeah.
we're a sponsor. So that can live, depending on what it is, it can live in this line, it can live in the economic development line, some of it has lived in the past in public health, depending on what it's doing. So I think it's the flexibility of it, and it fits into the narrative, quite honestly, of the town doesn't have the resources to do everything, but there are some things that we can just help with.
yeah, what I was sort of envisioning was something that would be where people could sort of apply for a 1 year kind of money that wasn't permanently in our budget, that there's this new initiatives fund, and if you ask for it, you only get it for 1 year, and there's a cap of maybe $1,000 or something. So it's mostly got to be volunteer run. And it either has to figure out how to sustain itself by people, putting in donations for the next year, or it has to find its own funding, or it has to then ask the second year, could we get added to the budget
So
officially?
that
I'm picturing
sounds-
something that would
That
be,
sounds like a council budget.
right, that's what I think it is a council budget item, but I just want to throw it out because it connects to these things.
A similar mentality, I think,
and
of trying to provide some resources to help good ideas get off the ground.
I love the idea of people feeling like we care about that as a council, and that we want little seed money, very small, not a big impact on the budget, but some seed money to start new ideas. So I just wanted to throw it out. We can cycle back around next week or whenever
Yeah,
we do
when we
that.
come back.
Is that okay?
So.
It's a great
I
idea.
personally-
I like it.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry.
Glad
Yeah,
Voice-
sorry. You want to make sure you knew I was still here.
Good.
Thank you.
I'm personally more comfortable with this new programs line because it's offset by a reduction in programming and events. I did want to spend a little bit of time tonight, even though the hour is getting late, talking about the Caribou Bog Outdoor Center. So a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month and a half ago or so, we were hit with two pretty big asks. So one-time donation, and then the inclusion in the budget of some support for the Caribou Bog Center. And I've thought a lot about that, so I'll just throw it out and then people can discuss it. I don't see where in the budget we can make a large one-time donation. I mean, I support the mission and the vision of OECD, and I want to help them go forward with new projects, but I just don't see it this year with the large increase from the school, a smaller increase from the county. But I do think the Caribou Bog Center itself has tremendous potential value for our community. So I would like to find some way to support this smaller ongoing fund to get the center up and running and make it even better than it was this year, which is pretty awesome. Even though I'm not sure that I can see where we'd get a $30,000 chunk of money to donate just to OECD. So, OEDC, excuse me. That's my thought on it. I know it's a service level change, which is why I want to vet it. It's something we haven't done in the past. But I think it has value for our community.
So that's the 9,500,
That's the 9,500.
which was presented as kind of a tax rebate because they upped the building. Is that right?
So I think part of it, Bob did an amazing spreadsheet for you
I wasn't here that day.
that had, I think there were multiple things in it. Do you have it? Do you want to review it?
Well, for Leo's sake,
I did watch it after.
it partially taxes, I mean, a good chunk of it is taxes, but there's like 5 cost areas that would have: real estate, utilities, property insurance, ongoing parking lot plowing, and porta potties. My estimate of our operating budget is like 16 to 17,000. We are getting monies from the ski club and the land trust as kind of a user fee, annual user fee. We eventually will have Friends of the Caribou Bog Outdoor Center to create an annual operating revenue. That is not off the ground yet. And in the meantime, OEDC needs to fund these are real expenses that gotta be paid. So essentially out of that, I'm asking, or we're asking, proposed 50% match on everything. The real estate, we've actually proposed 2/3, 70%. Because our value's probably gonna go, or our tax bill will go from.
So that's all in that 95 number.
That's all in the 95.
Okay.
Yep.
And in the 36 was the road.
No, that was just two.
25.
It was 25.
25 was the road. Okay, gotcha.
But the
Yeah.
ask is how much, the one-time ask?
The one-time capital ask is 25,000.
Okay.
9,500 for the ongoing annual ask, and the road is totally separate.
Okay,
That was Rob Yerxa. He was estimating about 36. We put a grant in for 36.
do you have figures on how many people used the space this first year?
I mean,
Just curious.
it certainly was used for both Caribou Bog races, and I counted over 40 people at the second event. I mean, in the building.
Yeah.
During the wars, I didn't count the first time, but I mean, I think some of you folks have been out there on a weekend day and there'll be 50 cars between the two lots. It certainly is utilized, and not so much right now, although it's amazing. You go out and the people that are there at 7 o'clock bird watching. I guess.
Can I ask Sophie, it looked like last year for OEDC Caribou Bog, we had 17.5 in the budget. The previous couple of years was around.
OEDC care nothing.
Total again or something, let me go to that.
So while you're looking, do you want me to ask a different question? So Jeff, to your point about what's sustainable, so the 9,500 is certainly less money, but it is also an ongoing ask, right? You're asking for it every
It is
year
an
in
ongoing-
perpetuity.
It is, yes.
So it's actually larger than the 25 if we were comparing in that way, right? This year it's smaller, but in the long run, it would be something you're hoping we would continue every year.
In fairness, I guess, I
Okay.
probably cutting my own foot off, but it's something we could ask for every year, and it may well adjust, ratchet down as we get offsetting revenue.
Okay,
But right now, this is what we're looking at with no offsetting revenue for
Yeah.
certainly the year.
Yes,
project.
the member of the Orono Land Trust. And I would like to state that I know that the Orono Land Trust has put at least 2 grants and contributions and volunteer hours, well over $100,000 in the trail zone. So it's not that, I think that 9,500 is a pittance compared to what's going on.
thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to add that we're also very interested in getting involved in the SAMP program. Or would dramatically profit from SAMP coming to fruition. That's going to be a huge effort on our part. We have some funds left from our sale of the great white elephant on Godfrey Drive. Because we invested that money, we've been able to basically rebuild everything we've spent up to a certain point with that. But we need to support the building, but we also want to be able to be involved in promoting SAMP in Orono, and having support from the town to keep what we have going is going to enable us to keep going, to really dig into the SAMP project as well. I know that there's hope that there'll be earmarks made available eventually to fund the SAMP effort, but we're a long way from getting those. We'd love to make it to that.
And for people that don't know SHEP, you go, SHEP, SAMP is,
That's my question.
SAMP is the wetland protection program,
It's
right?
basically, it's like, I think of it as a transferable development rights. Basically, we have areas that are well suited to development, except for these pesky little vernal pools, wildlife resources. What the SAMP program does is it allows us to recognize the value of those, find the similar resources other places, and preserve them in a significant fashion. I'm not sure exactly what the number is. I think it's on the order of 70 or 75 to 1 in terms of size. But we go out and we purchase those areas to protect the resource and allow that to continue. But it would let us put development where it's better suited. And it would help make Orono a more development friendly community, which has been a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, yep, I was reading the total again, so disregard my last comment.
At least
I was
I-
reading the special projects total, and I thought it was under ODC council.
And I'm gonna take this opportunity to just address Jeff's concern about the one-time ask. I mean, that was a number. Didn't throw it out there, but that's consistent with the other larger grants we've asked for from Bangor Savings, the Davis Foundation, and a few others. A couple local businesses I've approached for contributions have asked, has the town made a contribution?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a town resource, I feel, whatever number, and I thought this was gonna be part of a later discussion anyways, as far as one-time ask. I would ask you to consider some level, and I ask you to consider over 10,000 so you could get in the platinum one. But anyways, I think it'd be important for people walking in there to see the town of Orono as a sponsor of the construction.
Maybe this wasn't the right time to conflate those two things. Maybe we should discuss the 9,500 now in that other issue when we come to that later.
That was my understanding of tonight's.
But I also understand bringing them up together because they are going to the same organization, and if we make it piecemeal, it can be confusing to people. So thanks for answering the questions and helping us understand the whole situation. Bob.
And if there's a partnership with the town that would be, more or less helpful as you're pitching this to other people. For example, the town of Orono has gone on as a platinum member at $10,000. The difference between, 95 and 10 is like, it's helpful for us to hear that feedback now. So thank you.
Don't get touched up on 10.
Yeah.
15 works.
It
It needs to be good.
would be an ideal place for the seniors to do a field.
That'd be great. Love that idea.
Just on me listening.
We had,
You mean that's old people or the
Yeah,
seniors in the
yeah,
high school?
You have to get on the bus now.
we had the expression,
to tell them about birds.
including memorial service. It's going to be held. So
Nice.
there are a lot of aspects to this that people just figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion on page 56 material?
Since page 56 includes the pool, Councilor Demerit at the end of the last meeting asked for some pool numbers. So I'd like to just give those if I can.
Sure.
Last year, 2022, pool was open July and August. We served a total number of people through the gate. So not talking about individual separate, but just gate entry of 2,013 people. That's an average weekly use of 251 and an average daily use of 57.5. We could call it 58.
That's not nothing. Yeah. That's more than I would have ever been. Thank you for getting that information.
I didn't quite understand that.
Couldn't quite understand you.
I said thank you. Thank you for the information. Yeah, sorry.
And we were reduced hours because we couldn't find staff.
Yeah, yep. So the budget last year and this year is for the assumption that we have enough staff to fill all the hours that we normally would fill. If we're gonna meet that assumption, we need more people to apply. That's important.
It's on the sign out front right now. Does it say anywhere we trained? Like obviously flashing, like we train you, like you don't have to already have the, just a thought.
We, through the university, they have coordinated some classes. Those have passed at this point. I can have that conversation again if there's room to add a class before the pool opening date or shortly after to incorporate more staff, but that would be part of the conversation with them
And
as to.
the initial round of training that we pushed out might not be on the sign, but it did say, it
Just
said.
saying, applicants are still low. It might be worth thinking about another training and really flashing that on there because I know a lot of people wouldn't apply thinking I'm not a lifeguard. I can't apply for that job. Right. So just a thought.
And have we, or can we get the school to send out a notice that we're looking?
That's a good idea. You can? Yes.
I'm sure they could email blast the high school.
And I think it would be important, the message would be important that we should be taking the approach that we can get them trained, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's
obviously,
crucial.
maybe check with the university, but if the university can't do it, some.
Just
We normally do.
Yeah.
I think it's
So
just not
making that clear and sending it to the 400 people that are in high school.
What were the pool hours last summer? Is that on here somewhere or?
I don't,
Right.
The hours from Monday to Friday were 1 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay.
Closed on the weekends.
Right. So no weekends at all.
Not
Nice.
much.
Oh, wow. So that's so much less than it used to be a few years ago.
Prior, prior COVID numbers were much.
Way
different.
higher. I swam there a lot. It was way higher.
and I think our hope is that we'll be able to add swim lessons in, but we'd like to first be able to staff the pool.
Yeah.
And then the other issue we get, while we love people who can be lifeguards regardless of their age, if there are people who are under 18, they're partnered with somebody who's over 18. So having I would want them, because if we could get them excited now at 16 to be a lifeguard and have them for a few years, that would be lovely. But I don't want people to think if we suddenly get a flood in that we will have all these extra hours, because part of the issue is the under 18, over 18 for a variety of reasons.
So what you're saying is all of us who lifeguarded in our teens should go take your class and get recertified so we could go be there, right?
If you want to, sir.
Yeah, okay. So I remember hearing from folks who were lifeguarding that the way that worked was that they were being employed by the university and that the university decided where they worked, whether they worked on campus or for us on any given day. So even lifeguards we recruit may not get delegated to our pool. The university may delegate them to the university pool. Is that correct?
It is correct. I would suggest that the ability to have indoor and outdoor hours for some, what we heard is it made us more desirable than some of the outdoor only pools
For the lifeguards.
to the lifeguards, because outdoor only, you're at the mercy of the weather. You can, if you're trying to make money, that is not the best way to make money. I would also, based on the brief conversations I had with folks, there were more hours open in both locations. So you might get a sign. I would say people who had demonstrated an ability to work independently where you're not under direct supervision of the rec hierarchy probably had more time here than others.
But in terms of if we recruit more people, do we have any say about how those lifeguards are getting delegated? Like what % gets delegated to us versus the university pool? Or is that totally up to them?
This isn't as black and white as
I'm
that.
just curious, how does it work? Fill me in.
It's a relationship, and they reduce some of their hours to equalize our hours. And if there, I mean, it truly was a collaborative effort. So we are contracting the university's labor and also their expertise, because we no longer have access to that expertise. And for us, what was important is that we had stable access to somebody who understood how a pool was supposed to be staffed, managed, what was a good lifeguard and what was not a good lifeguard, that's important. And so I think that's kind of the plan. I do know that staffing, I mean, the reason that you see all the advertisements out there around the region for lifeguards is because everybody is hurting.
Very hard. And I am not dissing University Pool. I swim there like 4 times a week and I love it. So not that. I just want to understand how that works out for us.
Yeah, it is not. One of the things I like about the relationship with the university across all of our contracts is while the money might be very formal and the liabilities are very formal, there's a lot of relationship and this is my need and this is what's important. How can we work together, which is unique.
Here's a suggestion. The University Pool is closed right now for like 2 to 3 weeks of maintenance, which really stinks for those of us who love to swim. See if you can get them to close it in July instead. And then you'd get more lifeguard hours and those of us who want to swim could still swim. There's a suggestion.
That sounds lovely. I
Thank
think
you.
the other thing to put people on notice with is we have been at the mercy of the one vendor who is willing to come up and try to fix the gutters with Rob. At this point in time, it looks like that vendor is going to be here the second week of August. I know Rob is trying really hard to negotiate and get us as far to the end of the summer as he can. But at this point, when you look out down into the new drainage pond that the school put in, you can actually see the water sprouting from the pool into the detention pond. So it is, along with the nice faucets, I think the fountains are almost like a feature that come up. I'm just afraid that we're doing more damage that will cost us more long-term. So we've got to get that done, and I'd love it if we could do it in September, but it doesn't seem like the vendor is that flexible.
As far as that's concerned too, we have looked in the past couple of years, we've opened it. Pushing and the first two, like, just after the pool ends, so it's like June.
June 20th is the current day staff is trying.
So it'd be like 2 weeks in June, so you can get those weeks back. So it'd probably be about the same 8 weeks that we've been. It's just a little bit in the little cold zone. We'll call it the cold zone. Because June is a little chilly,
Refreshing.
but that's okay.
And just to be clear, on page 58, it looks like in the box there, next to contracted lifeguards, that the amount of money you put in the budget here would staff more than hours than what we had last year. It'd be staffed weekday, weekend, and some evening hours. So it would expand hours. If you could find enough lifeguards, you have the money in here to pay them.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our last section is on after-school programming, which we've already discussed, but if there's other questions on after-school programming, this might be the time to talk.
They do the employment revenue split.
So that one's not a revenue split. That one, we pay them a fixed cost for the administration and oversight was 12,000. Is it going up? And they, then they give us the actual cost of their employees and any expenses they have, and we pay that. So all the revenue comes to us. We pay known costs or expected costs, actual costs. Does that make sense?
When all the revenue comes to us, we pay the employee hours that we actually use plus 12,000 as a fixed cost for our admin this year, but it's going up somewhat.
It's going up. I think it's
And the reasoning behind that was that we're trying to find better, more folks that are working in this field and that can be on their own a little bit. So they're working to change their structure a little bit, and it looks like we'll have a graduate assistant that would oversee this program specifically there. Well, so a better oversight on their side.
Okay, thank you.
Before we close for the evening, I wanted to circle back to Dan's question from the end of last week's meeting where he asked for some time to discuss any service level changes that people felt were appropriate to the section that we discussed on general government last week. So now's the time to talk about general government things that we may not have, we might have been too into the particulars to talk about the general scope of government services last week.
I can say that I know one of the like possible cuts that was mentioned with this reducing the public health line, right? Did that come out of the general budget? Yep. And I guess I want to say, I definitely don't want to do that. I feel like our contribution to the homeless shelter is important, and that's one that I just would not want to take out.
We're not doing that right now, right?
Well, that is the question, right? Like service levels, is it not? Like, doesn't it
Well-
connect to what programs and service?
But we're
levels
not
we-
covering that whole.
No, just the ones that related to there's only 2 or 3 on here that had to do with the
Government.
general government. There was this, and there was professional fees for the lawyer.
Mhm.
And there was the exercise program for the staff whose name I don't know, but thank you. But that is it. Those were the 3, correct, Sophie? That were possible cuts suggested in that area. I'm definitely more open to the lawyer fee one. I think that could be fine to reduce for me. And I'm done talking. Everyone else should take their time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We talked a little bit about the attorney and that we might not make that we may overrun because we have the stuff going on, I guess. And so that's the gamble, obviously, but 3,500, I think, is what we put in. So we're suggesting something a little bit more last time. So I would be fine with trying that and trying to manage to it, I guess. You know, and
So,
you can, obviously.
so a reduction, reasonable reduction in the fee for lawyers, lawyer fees in that section. Yeah. Good. Seems like there's some general agreement that that might be a place to cut. Dan, did you have any thoughts or suggestions on this part?
No, I think that makes sense, and I apologize, I don't have the book in front of me now, I've just walked away from my car. But I appreciate the chance to talk about it. I like the idea of the council budget, kind of leading by example in terms of, you know, if we've got a interest in, and I know that the increase in the council line was very small. There's not a lot of money to begin that in that space to begin with. But I do like the idea of us leading by example. If we can find, I don't know what it costs to come in at a 0% change year over year, but it didn't strike me that it was a lot of money. So and that's a conversation we can still have, I think, but I do appreciate, I think it'll be helpful to revisit these conversations the following week. Once we've had a chance to think about them.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. I think so. Maybe we'll start next week's discussion with a recap or review of what we talked about here and any thoughts on potential changes to this section. And that will be our jumping off point for our new discussion next week.
So the
Thank you.
other item that came in, and I haven't had a chance to even look at it beyond adding an hour to next Thursday's meeting to discuss trends. The only, I mean, council can do whatever council wants to do, but this was some of our smaller budget items and we're at 2.5 hours. Next week, we've got the biggest. You just double check to make sure I'm right. I think we've got public safety, which is the single biggest and more complex budget. So I would assume you're probably gonna be here till 7:30 just doing that. So I just wanted to throw that out so you were aware of that.
So
I'm definitely in favor of the data trend discussion. I feel like it's important to look at that because I can't really frame my thinking about what we're doing with the budget until we do that. So I hate to push that to the end. I'd really like to extend it. That's just me. So I'm just asking everybody else. I'd rather stay late and do it early, but I want to hear from other people.
So we have a council workshop on Monday that has 2 items on it. One is the Environment Committee restructure, which is not super burning. That could wait another month. I don't know why, if it's agreeable to you, we couldn't swap that out, do the council policies and procedures, because I think there was some desire to get some agreed upon general idea before we tried to do a facilitated work plan. And then put that, so that's about an hour discussion, and then do that.
Sounds good.
Can we do the budget first? Does anyone else care? I would just rather do it
That's
first.
fine
If I had
with
to
me.
push something,
Yeah,
I'd
that's what I was
rather
gonna
push
say
the
that.
policy and procedures than the budget stuff. Me, if we run over,
Well,
I'd rather.
I think what Sophie's saying is that on Monday, we could do the policy and procedure and the data trends discussion.
Right. I was just suggesting, could we do the data trends part first? Because if something gets shortchanged, I'd rather have it be the policies and procedures, which we have more time to deal with potentially than the budget thing, which I feel like there's a deadline crunch. Does everyone feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I like that. Good suggestion, Sophie, to.
I like that.
rethink money.
So
Yeah, that's
I
excellent.
understand you have data stuff that you were gonna send out over the weekend. Any chance I could get that
Tomorrow?
sooner?
I will
So
do
I
my
could-
darndest. I have 17 college kids at my house for 20 bucks. I'm exaggerating. I think it's only 7, and I will do my darndest, Sophie. Okay?
Okay.
Feels like 7.
Before we close, are there any public comment?
Anybody on Zoom?
Okay,
So
well,
can I, just to clarify
Yeah.
on the data, you are gonna give us 2024 salary information. I did have I'm a little confused. There was a process, went through updating salaries. Some were 2 steps, I think, some were 3 steps. Is that completed or is that complete in 2024?
That completes in 2025.
Because I thought there was a mid-step in 21 or something like that.
No,
We're in step 2 in 24.
we're
I
in
said a
step.
mid-step.
So we adjusted the pay scale 3% in the middle of the year in 2022. But that was not part of, that was not part of the plan.
When did the first step happen? What year?
23, it was
23.
when you adopted the budget, you adopted the first step.
And this is 24 would be step,
Yep.
25 would be step 3 according to the current plan.
Yes.
Thank you. Got it.
all right,
Thank you.
then we're adjourned until Monday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.